These are the 0 and negative exponent rules. The 0 exponent rule says anything to the power of 0 is 1. So a to the 0 is 1. This whole mess to the 0 is 1. One thing you want to be careful of on this, or dealing with any exponents, however, is if I have something like 4x to the 0, notice this one does not have the parentheses that I have in this example. The 4 would not be affected by the 0 power because essentially the x is the only thing to the 0 power. So this would be 4 times 1, which would of course be 4. So be careful on exponents to know which exponent, which base the exponent belongs to. The negative exponent implies a reciprocal, and a reciprocal just says flip it over. So I tell my students often that wherever a negative exponent is, that negative is telling you that it's in the wrong spot. So here, if I wrote this as a fraction, this negative says, hey, I'm in the wrong position, put me in the other position. So it was on the top and now it's on the bottom. Same thing here, it was on the bottom and it's negative, and so I moved it to the top. Notice once you make that move, the negative exponent goes away. Please do not mistake an negative a to the n as the same as this. This would just be negative a to the n. There's nothing I can do with that. The negative is not on the exponent, so be very careful that you don't confuse your negatives. Here are some for us to try together. The first one, I have a to the third times a to the negative third. Sorry about that weird multiplication sign. That gives me a to the 3 plus negative 3, which is a to the 0. And we know that anything to the 0 power is 1. 5 to the negative 2 is 1 over 5 squared. Remember that negative says put it in the opposite position. And then 5 squared is something I can compute, which is 25. And for my last one, 15 divided by 5 is 3. And then 2 minus 4 is negative 2. So I can write it as a to the negative 2. I'm going to show you two different ways on this one. And then 5 minus 5 is 0. And if I did it this way, I have 3. And then I have a to the negative 2, which says move that to the opposite position. And then b to the 0 is equal to 1. So some people prefer this middle step. I typically don't do the middle step, so I'm going to do it a second time and show you the way I would typically do it. 15 divided by 5 would give me 3. 2 minus 4 is negative 2, and so instead of bothering to write it as negative 2, I move it directly to the bottom. And then 5 minus 5 is 0, so b to the 0 is 1, so that's my final answer. Go ahead and try these three on your own, then press play to see how you did. For my first one, 3 times 8 is 24. I have 1x and negative 2x's, so on this one, remember I'm adding exponents. 1 plus negative 2 is negative 1. So again, if you're doing that in between step, you would write x to the negative first. If you're going straight to the answer, you would just put that x on the bottom. 3 plus negative 1 is 2. And so my final answer would be 24 on the top, because remember 24 has an exponent of positive 1. X to the first on the bottom and y squared on the top. If I didn't want to do that in between step, I would have just moved that x down right away. For my second example, I've got a fraction that's all to the negative 1. Remember that negative says flip it, so I can think of it kind of like this. I have 3z to the negative 1 over 4y to the negative 1. Those are both in the wrong spot, so I'm going to put the 4y here on top, and I'm going to put the 3z here on the bottom. And my last example here, 15 divided by 25, I'm just going to reduce that by 5s, so you can show that work over here if you would like. 1 minus negative 3, be careful on this one. If I have 1 minus negative 3, that's basically 1 plus 3, which is 4, so x to the positive 4. Some people also like to think of this as taking this negative 3 because it's in the wrong position and moving it to the top. So I would have 1 on the top plus another 3 that I moved up there, which means 4 on the top. For my y's, I have negative 4 minus 4. Again, be careful. Negative 4 minus 4 is negative 8. Because it's a negative, I'm going to move it directly to the bottom of the fraction, y to the 8th on the bottom. And then 3 minus 3 is z to the 0, and z to the 0 is 1. So that is my final answer.